A Great Argead Saga Alexein, Alexander the Great. Volume 1, Telesias, The War Dance. By Macaulay Naki. Episode 54, Tangible Peace. October 10th, 368 BCE, the Macedonian frontier. Pelopidas rode near the head of the vanguard column, a formidable, unyielding silhouette of dark iron and muscle, framed against the blinding glare of the rising sun. He had come north to Macedon, not as an open conqueror, but as a heavily armed mediator, a polite vulture seeking to stabilize the internal civil strife that had turned the royal palace of Pella into a meat grinder after the assassination of King Alexander II. Just weeks ago, in a final, suffocating assembly with the fractured Macedonian nobility, Pelopidas had articulated his cold, pragmatic rationale with the smooth, terrifying authority of a master chess player. A stable Macedon is a buffer against barbarian incursions, a shield for the throat of Greece. Pelopidas had announced, his deep baritone bouncing off the high stone arches of the throne room. This is not about domination, gentlemen, but about securing the peace. Macedon bleeds from within, making you easy prey to the predators circling your borders, the Illyrians and the Paeonians. But now, as the column cleared, the jagged northern passes and the sprawling wind-swept expanse of Thessaly opened before them, the mask of a diplomat slipped away. It was replaced by the calculating precision of a Boeotian hegemon. Charon, his trusted lieutenant and the man who had risked everything alongside him during the bloody liberation of Thebes, pulled his mount closer to the general. His eyes scanned the long, pathetic line of weeping boys and the proud but thoroughly broken Macedonian noble escorts riding behind them. "They look at you like you are an executioner," Pelopidas Charon murmured, his voice pitched low beneath the steady, rhythmic thunder of the cavalry escort. Regent Ptolemy looked as though he wanted to swallow his own tongue when you finalized the metric for the children. You left Pella with the entire future generation of their royal line as collateral. Pelopidas let out a short, robust laugh, his massive shoulders shifting easily under his polished bronze musculata. "Let them look. A bleeding dog respects the hand that binds its wounds, Charon. Even if the bandage is suffocatingly tight," Pelopidas rumbled, his slate gray eyes scanning the horizon. "Ptolemy is a usurper who rules by a frayed thread. He needs our military recognition to survive the vipers in his own court. Taking the Argead boy and the sons of their highest houses isn't an execution. It's an anchor. It fastens the north permanently to the floor of the Cadmea. And the boy himself?" Charon glanced back toward Philip, who rode in rigid, unblinking silence alongside the veteran Parmenian, the youngest prince. "He does not weep like the smaller ones. He has been systematically auditing our scouts since we crossed the border checkpoint. He looks less like a hostage and more like an engineer taking structural measurements." Pelopidas turned his head slightly, his sharp hawk-like eyes narrowing as he caught sight of 14-year-old Philip. A slow, chilling smirk spread across the general's weathered face. "Agreements are but words, Charon, unless they are backed by something more tangible," Pelopidas said, his voice dropping into a gravelly, authoritative purr. "The boy is intelligent, yes. I parsed it in Pella. But his intelligence is raw clay for us to mold. We are not just holding these children to keep their clans from breaking treaties. We are going to civilize them. We will steep them in our rhetoric, drown them in our philosophy, and master their minds with our tactics." "You want to turn the Argead prince into a Boeotian statesman," Charon observed, a faint smile playing on his lips. "I want to turn him into an asset," Pelopidas corrected sharply. "When he returns to Pella years from now, he will look south to Thebes not with the primal, illiterate hatred of a northern tribal chief, but with the deferential awe of a disciple. He will see our phalanx, our assemblies, and our culture, and he will know that Macedonia can only ever hope to exist as a client under the shadow of our wings." Charon nodded, satisfied, looking back toward the horizon where the massive ancient strongholds of Thessaly awaited their passage. "A grand design. Let us see if the boy has the stomach for it." "He will learn, or he will break," Pelopidas remarked coldly, turning his gaze back to the front of the column, completely oblivious to the fact that the quiet, calculating boy behind him was already memorizing the precise rhythm of his shadow. For Philip, this was no simple change of scenery. It was a physical, violent uprooting. In the intricate, merciless world of Greek politics, His royal blood was nothing more than a powerful piece of state currency. His presence in Thebes was a preemptive strike against future instability, a literal cage designed to ensure no ambitious faction would attempt to seize the throne while the Argead line was held captive in Theban hands. Pelopidas had sought Philip out directly before they reached the border river, halting his massive warhorse beside the boy's smaller mount. The giant beast's breath plumed in the cold morning air, its iron shoes striking the bedrock with the authority of an empire. "This is not a slight against your house, young prince," the general said, his deep-set eyes boring into Philip's unwavering, stormy gaze. "Think of it as an opportunity. You will learn much in Thebes, observe our ways, and return to Macedon a wiser man." Philip looked up at the legendary commander, refusing to let his eyes waver. "And what if I do not wish to learn from those who take me by force, General?" Pelopidas let out a low, humorless chuckle, looking down at the boy with the patronizing pity one might show a stubborn hound. "Force is a crude word, Philip. Let us call it alignment," Pelopidas countered, his posture immovable. "Thebes does not look for enemies, we look for order. You will sit at the tables of our greatest minds. You will see how a true state operates. When you look at me, do you see a captor, or do you see the future?" "I see a man a long way from home," Philip replied, his voice terrifyingly quiet, carrying a cold architectural stability for a boy of barely 14. A sharp, dangerous glint flickered in Pelopidas's eyes before settling back into easy imperial arrogance. "A man whose home dictates the fate of the entire world, boy. Remember that." As they rode deeper into the endless, shimmering horizons of Thessaly, Pelopidas gestured broadly with his silver-weighted riding crop toward the vast plains that stretched to the mountains. "Tell me, Prince of Macedon, what do you see in this land of Thessaly?" Philip scanned the white expanses, his sharp eyes picking up the distant dust clouds of moving herds and the strategic layout of fortified mountain settlements. "I see fertile soil, feudal agriculture, and proud horsemen," Philip answered, his tone flat and analytical. "Cavalry clans who answer to no one but themselves." Pelopidas nodded, a smirk touching his lips. "Much like your own Macedonia, then. This land of Thessaly lacks a spine, which is why it constantly bleeds. Alexander Ferry, a tyrant of the worst kind, has ambushed and enslaved these people. Thebes was called upon to free them and restore the balance. We bring them stability." "A tyrant?" Philip asked, his brow furrowing as his intellect processed the definition. "Like the Illyrians and the Paeonians who invade our borders and threaten our people. You march into another man's home to save it from itself. Our Hellas is always threatened by chaos, boy, and it is the burden of the strong to create a new order," Pelopidas said, his tone carrying the weight of unshakable conviction. "Taming this land, this vital corridor of Thessaly that sits squarely between Thebes and Macedonia, is no easy task. But do not mistake our purpose here." The general reined his horse closer, the sheer mass of his armor casting a long, suffocating shadow over the young prince. His voice lost its sharp edge, replaced by the resonant, persuasive tone of an orator. "Thebes frees neighbor nations, just like we freed ourselves from Sparta," Pelopidas continued, his eyes holding Philip's. "We do not seek dominance by violence, absolute order, and slavery, but alliances. True partnerships. And that includes your kingdom, Macedon. We want a strong, stable ally in the north, not a broken servant." Philip remained silent, his gaze dropping for a fraction of a second to the heavy bronze crest on Pelopidas's breastplate, before looking back up. He heard the grandeur in the words, but his mind, already sharpening into a clinical instrument, measured the massive gap between a philosopher's promise and a conqueror's march. Pelopidas turned his horse back toward the front, his underlying message hanging over the column like a heavy, suffocating shroud. To the Macedonian nobles, it was a profound humiliation. To Pelopidas, it was merely the administrative price of order. "Stability is not bought cheaply," Pelopidas remarked coldly to Charon, who had drawn up beside him. "Sometimes sacrifices must be made for the greater good." Under the resolute, hawk-like gaze of the Lion of Thebes, Philip continued the long journey. Each step took him further from the volatile, blood-stained court of his birth and deeper into the suffocating embrace of Theban power. At this moment in history, Thebes stood at the absolute zenith of its prominence. They had broken the back of legendary Sparta at Leuctra, They had secured the south, and now, by tethering the Argead line, the north was entirely under their control. To Pelopidas and Epaminondas, their grand vision to rule over all of Hellas was absolute. It did not feel like a mere political ambition. It felt like a guaranteed promise, a destiny written in the stars and sealed in bronze. They looked upon these Macedonian boys and saw nothing more than dynamic security pieces on a grand chessboard. But history is blind to the arrogance of hegemons. Nobody on that road could have known the terrifying irony of what Pelopidas had just done. The road to Thebes, for Philip, was the road to destiny. He was moving from the slaughterhouse of the north to the forge of the south, and that was the absolute, unyielding truth of this exile. As Philip stared into the southern horizon, his heart was already hardening into the very ire that would one day redefine warfare. The cold, calculated silence of the Spartan council chamber was absolute. It was a space of stark stone and dying hearth embers, where the air felt as thin and sharp as a mountain pass. Gylippus, the Spartan agent, had just returned from the north. He stood before Agesilaus II and the young king Cleomenes II, his cloak heavy with the dust of the road and his breathing labored, erratic. He did not offer the customary bow. He stood as a man who had stared into an abyss that stripped away the pretenses of kingship. Agesilaus leaned forward, the firelight carving deep, severe lines into his brow. "You were sent to watch the Argead house, Gylippus. You were sent to see if Pella would hold. Speak." Gylippus exhaled a ragged breath, his voice hitting the cold walls like gravel. "It is finished, my king. I fled during the chaos of the royal funeral, a mistake that cost us our eyes in the capital. By the time I circled back from the Illyrian border, the city had been gutted." Cleomenes shifted, his youthful face tightening with a sudden, sharp dread. The pretender? Did he seize the boys? He moved in the wake of the bloodletting, Gylippus said, his eyes unfocused. "I arrived to find the sanctum breached. I saw the aftermath, the blades abandoned in the dark, the clinical, detached cruelty of the usurper's guard. They turned that inner seal into a slaughterhouse." Agesilaus gripped the edges of his seat, his knuckles whitening. "Did you see the bodies? Were the sons of the house among them?" "I saw them pull a man from the debris," Gylippus whispered, his resolve failing for a moment. He had been shielding others with his own flesh. The room was sprayed with blood, the walls, the floor, the very stone they claimed was holy. It was not a battle, Agesilaus. It was a tomb. The king of Sparta remained motionless, his eyes closed. The silence stretched, suffocating and heavy, until Cleomenes finally broke it, his voice quiet and reverent in its horror. "Pausanias has committed a crime that will stain the Macedonian soil for a generation." Agesilaus finally opened his eyes, and they were colder than the stone floor beneath them. "Crime is a word for those who care for justice, boy. In Pella, he has simply cleared the board. He has ensured there is no one left to claim the throne. He thinks he has," Gylippus countered, stepping closer, his shadow looming large in the hearthlight. "But my scouts found the marks of an escape. I saw the dislodged stones near the marsh exit. The sons of the house are not in that room, and they are not dead. They are ghosts moving through the reeds. Pausanias has slaughtered his own shadow, and he is too blind to realize the living still hunt him." Agesilaus stood, his long shadow stretching across the council floor to touch Gylippus's feet. "Then the war in the north is not over. It has merely begun to bleed." The news of the Macedonian exodus hit the Spartan Gerousia not with the frantic intellectual panic of Athens, but with the heavy rhythmic silence of men who measured the world only in the length of a spear. In the austere halls of the assembly, the report was laid out on a table stripped of all ornament. King Cleomenes listened as his ephors detailed the movement of the Argead prince and the near 70 noble scions. He did not pace, he did not lean over a map. He stood perfectly still, his hands resting on the pommel of his xiphis, his gaze fixed on the doorway as if he could see the boys being marched toward the Theban gates through the very stone of the walls. "They are not just boys," Cleomenes said, his voice a low, raspy grind of granite on granite. "They are a phalanx, broken down and reforged." A ripple of disdain, sharp and bitter, flowed through him. "The Macedonians are soft," he thought. "They trade their own blood for the illusion of stability. They have handed their future to the Theban wolf, thinking they are buying peace, when they are merely sharpening the blade that will eventually turn toward their own throats. Ephors, Cleomenes commanded, his eyes narrowing into cold, predatory slits. Do not waste our breath on influence or alliances. The Athenians will spend the next year writing letters and debating the virtue of their hostages. Let them talk. While they talk, we watch. He turned to a young commander, his voice dropping to a command. Thebes thinks they are creating a client king. But a wolf raised in a Theban cage does not necessarily become a Theban dog. It learns the scent of the cage. It learns the weak points in the bars. Watch Philip. Observe if he submits or if he merely observes. Cleomenes looked toward the north, his mind already discarding the diplomatic fluff. If Thebes wished to train a king, let them. If the boy was a true warrior, he would use Theban tactics to conquer Thebes. If he was weak, he would rot. Either way, Sparta did not need to send envoys. They only needed to keep their walls high and their iron ready. Let the Thebans play their game of tutelage. Cleomenes finished, his tone devoid of pity. But send word to our agents in the north, to the families who lost their sons. Do not offer them Athenian liberty. Offer them nothing but the truth. Their house is no longer theirs. If they want their sons back, let them be ready to tear the Cadmea down brick by brick when the time comes. We do not need a diplomatic wedge. We need an uprising. He walked toward the exit, his movements measured and heavy, with the weight of the Lycurgan law. While the north burned with Theban ambition and the west rotted with Persian gold, Sparta remained the anvil. Let the wolves play at being masters. When the iron was ready, it would only need one hammer. High in the cool, rugged heights of the Peloponnese, the Arcadian League, the fragile confederation of mountain shepherds and hoplites, received the news with a clarity that bordered on terror. Their council gathered not in the polished marble halls of Athens or the gilded chambers of the East, but in a makeshift chamber of timber and stone, where the wind whistled through the gaps, carrying the scent of pine and impending war. The intelligence had been brought by a desperate rider, his pony near collapse, bearing word of the Theban procession into the Cadmea. They are not just taking hostages, like Lycomedes of Mantinea said, his voice hard as the mountain flint of his homeland. He paced the length of the hall, his hand resting on the hilt of his short sword. Epaminondas is not merely securing a border, he's hoarding the future of the Aegean. By holding these noble boys, he is ensuring that when the next generation of Macedonian lords rises, they will be nothing more than puppets of the Boeotian League. A younger delegate from Thebes stood, his brow furrowed. But why would Thebes risk the ire of the north? To turn Macedonia into a shield is a bold move, but it leaves their own flank exposed to us. If we are not part of their hegemony, then what are we? Simply the next to be consumed? We are the buffer, Lycomedes replied, stopping to stare at the map pinned to the table. They think they can play a game of chess with the northern hills, while we look south to Sparta. But they have underestimated the boy. Philip. He's a predator in a cage, and Thebes is foolish enough to believe they are the ones holding the key. Lycomedes looked out the window toward the southern horizon, toward the broken power of Sparta. Thebes believes they are the masters of the world, balancing the north against the south. But they have brought a fire into their house that will eventually turn their own legacy to ash. If Macedonia wakes up as a wolf, it will not matter if they are Theban trained or not. A wolf cares only for the hunt. The Theban move is clear, Lycomedes continued, his voice dropping to a gravelly, intense tone. They want to control the northern tides so they can focus their full strength on crushing the remainder of the Peloponnese. They want to be the sole voice of Greece, speaking through the oracle at Delphi, while they hold the throat of the north. What shall we do? The delegate asked, his voice betraying a flicker of panic. We do what the Arcadians have always done, Lycomedes said, drawing his sword just an inch from its scabbard, the sound of steel against wood sharp in the quiet room. We survive in the shadows. We watch the Cadmea. If the boy Philip starts to learn too well, if the war dance becomes something more than a tutor's plaything, we will be the first to know. Thebes thinks they have brought a pet into their home. We must prepare for the day that pet decides to bite. He looked around the room, meeting the eyes of the gathered leaders. Do not rush to challenge Thebes yet. Let them become bloated with their own confidence. Let them tighten their grip on the north until their knuckles turn white. When they are at their most secure, that is when the north will turn. And on that day, We must be ready to choose the side of the wolf, not the cage. The air in the chamber of the Athenian Boeotian tasted of stale oil and nervous sweat, but the true chill came from the north. It was late 368 BC, and the fragile peace holding the Greek world together had finally snapped under the weight of a single, devastating reality. Thebes was no longer content to merely master Boeotia. Under the relentless drive of Pelopidas, the shadow of the Cadmea was stretching over the mountains, rewriting the map of northern Greece in real time. The extraction of nearly 70 high-born royal hostages from Pella, the very marrow of the Macedonian high houses, including a young, watchful Philip, was not a diplomatic gesture. It was an annexation of the future. Across the Aegean, the old men of Athens stared at the parchment maps with a cold, creeping dread, knowing that the friction between their democracy and the Boeotian juggernaut was about to ignite across three distinct, bleeding fronts. Yet, even as panic mounted, they were bound by an ancient, uncompromising promise that the survival of Athens would be forged in the blinding light of public debate, under the scrutiny of thousands of citizen eyes. To the thronging masses crowded onto the stone slopes of the Pnyx, the war was still fought with words. Grand strategy, foreign entanglements, and military decrees were laid bare before the populace, argued by orators, and decided by a collective vote. "Look at them," Archon Callistratus rasped before the assembly, his trembling finger tracing the ink line that snaked from Pella down to the Boeotian gates. His voice carried over the restless murmur of thousands. "They aren't just taking boys as guarantees, gentlemen. They are taking our tomorrow. The Boeotian wolf is at our gates, and if we content ourselves with idle philosophy, while Pelopidas chains the north, our democracy will die choked by its own laws." Fierce arguments clashed in the open air. Around the circular mahogany table, the council remained dead silent, the weight of the realization pressing down like lead. "We are blind," the spymaster thought, his eyes darting to the flickering lamps as if searching for hidden ears. "We spent decades watching Sparta tear itself apart, never once looking north until the noose was already knotted around our throats." "If Pelopidas succeeds in civilizing those northern cubs," Callistratus muttered aloud, his voice dropping to a gravelly whisper during a recess of the council, "we won't have to worry about barbarian raids anymore. We will be facing a Macedonian phalanx commanded by Theban minds." Every public debate was a stage, masking the deeper, darker desperation, taking root behind closed doors. The northern vacuum had a pulse, and it was beating to a Theban rhythm. Under the cold, calculating guidance of statesmen like Pelopidas, Thebes had long since ceased to be a mere regional power. They were plunging their hands directly into the dynastic turbulence of Macedonia, arbitrating royal successions, and gutting the northern high houses of their future. Nearly 70 noble youths, including a sharp-eyed young Philip, were being marched down toward the stone teeth of the Cadmea. To the old men sitting in the council halls of Athens, it was an intolerable geopolitical coup, a swift and devastating checkmate executed before the democracy even realized the board had changed. Because to Athens, Pella and its surrounding highlands were never just a collection of quarrelsome tribes. They were the lifeline of the city's survival, the sprawling forests that bled timber for the trireme fleets, the fertile plains that poured grain into Attic ports. Unified, Theban-aligned Macedonian state pressed a cold, tightening hand directly around Athens' throat. 70 heirs, Callistratus spat, slamming his palm against the map until the inkwells rattled. They haven't just taken hostages, they've cleared the board and set their own pieces. Across the table, a veteran commander stared hollowly at the northern border, his mind racing through the grim arithmetic of survival. If the grain stops flowing from the Thermaic Gulf or the shipwrights lose their timber, the general thought, a cold sweat breaking across his brow. This entire democratic experiment starves in the dark before single Theban spear crosses our frontier. "They think they are civilizing the barbarians down in Boeotia," Callistratus muttered, his eyes narrowing into venomous slits as he leaned over the parchment. "They are too arrogant to realize they are forging a double-edged sword, and the handle is right at our throat." The shadow play stretched far beyond the rocky passes of Greece, bleeding into the gilded, suffocating halls of Susa. The tension was a silent war fought with parchment, silk, and imperial coin. Both Athens and Thebes dispatched their finest envoys to the court of the Persian great king, Artaxerxes II, each desperately groveling for the ultimate prize, the great king's gold and official recognition as the sole hegemon of Greece. But when Theban diplomats, riding the unstoppable momentum of Pelopidas' growing prestige, successfully twisted Persian influence to dictate terms, panic swept through the Attic assembly. "They kneel in the dirt of Susa and sell our autonomy for derricks," an Athenian statesman hissed, tossing a report across the marble floor in pure disgust. "Pelopidas has spun the great king around his finger, and Artaxerxes is ready to sign away the fate of Hellas with a stroke of a Persian pen." Callistratus stared at the flickering torchlight, a bitter taste rising in his throat. "We pride ourselves on the freedom of the assembly," he thought, the irony burning like acid. "Yet here we are, begging foreign tyrants to save us from a domestic monster we were too proud to crush ourselves." While the general direction of policy was shouted from the speaker's platform, the true survival of the state was plotted in the dark. Out of sight of the assembly, in sequestered chambers heavy with the smell of unlit oil lamps, a different kind of governance took place. The execution of counter-strategies, planting clandestine agents in foreign quarters, secretly funneling silver to discontented northern barons, and plotting the subversion of enemy tutors within the Cadmea, could never survive the democratic sunlight. "If we bring these measures to the Knicks, the marketplace will be crawling with Boeotian ears by sunset," Callistratus thought bitterly, leaning over a coded dispatch from a spymaster in the north. "If diplomacy in the East has failed us," Callistratus said aloud, his voice dropping into a harsh conspiratorial whisper as he leaned over the map of Macedon, "then we fight in the shadows. Find every discontented baron in the northern hills. If we cannot possess the throne of Pella, we will ensure it is built on quicksand." The intelligence gathered by spies and the covert orchestration of proxy resistance were handled entirely behind closed doors by select magistrates and tight-lipped inner circles, moving in total secrecy to prevent Boeotian or Persian agents from intercepting their underground game. The shadow stretching across the barracks was cast in bronze and iron. Athens watched with a mounting, suffocating dread as Thebes systematically perfected its military supremacy, an art form embodied by the peerless terror of the sacred band and the brilliant, terrifying geometry of Epaminondas's tactical innovations. By dragging Philip and the high-born heirs into the heart of the Boeotian League, Thebes was setting up a school for conquerors, forging a blade in foreign fire that would one day turn back on its makers. Yet, for all the subterranean panic, the conflict remained trapped in a tense, suspended breath. Open total war had temporarily dissolved into a silent, venomous war of regional influence and dark diplomatic maneuvering. But the atmosphere in late 368 BC was a powder keg waiting for a spark. The old men of the democracy knew the bitter truth. If they sat quietly and allowed Thebes to cement its iron grip over both Macedon and Thessaly, the Athenian Republic would soon find itself permanently locked out, suffocated, and entirely erased from the future of continental politics. "Look at the discipline of their phalanx," an Athenian general murmured, his knuckles whitening as he gripped the edge of the bronze map. "Epaminondas isn't just winning fields, he's rewriting the laws of war itself." Callistratus crossed his arms, staring coldly at the empty space where the northern kingdom lay. "We call them barbarians," he thought, a dark chill settling in his chest. "Yet we are handing them the very keys to our destruction, sitting idly by while Thebes teaches them how to break the gates of Greece." "They are building a school for our executioners," Callistratus said aloud, his voice flat with lethal clarity. "If we do not shatter that northern grip before those boys grow into men, the sun will set on Athens forever." The dust of the Diplomat Gate still clung to young Aristotle's sandals as he stepped into the sacred olive groves of the Academy, fresh from the rugged northern salt winds of Stagira. Carrying a heavy woolen cloak and a mind already teeming with the anatomy of marine life and the logic of the natural world. But as he walked beneath the ancient trees, looking for the gravel paths where Plato's disciples paced and debated, the warm spring air of Attica suddenly felt thin and suffocating. "Where are the walls?" he thought, his fingers unconsciously tightening around the strap of his travel pack as he surveyed the open landscape. Where is the structure? There were no manicured dormitories here, no halls built to shelter the wayfaring scholar. Just the sprawling, sun-drenched sanctuary of Academus, flanked by rented rooms scattered through the city and crowded quarters shared among foreign youth. "Looking for a bed, northerner?" Aristotle turned to see a weathered attendant sweeping stray olive leaves from a stone bench, eyeing his heavy woolen cloak with unconcealed amusement. "I'm looking for the place of instruction," Aristotle replied, his voice carrying the distinct heavy vowels of the Macedonian borderlands. The attendant chuckled, leaning on his broom handle. "Instruction is everywhere and nowhere out here, boy. There are no dorms for the likes of you. You find a cot in a damp attic above the potter's quarter, or you share a pallet with 3 other desperate provincials near the outer wall. If you want a roof that doesn't leak when the attic rains hit, you pay double. And even then, the landlords look at your accent and double it again." Aristotle stared past him toward the sunlit paths, where white-robed youths walked in deep, harmonious discourse. "They sleep in soft beds paid for by silver mines, while I must barter for floor space in a crowded alley," he muttered bitterly to himself. The cold reality of his status as a foreign-born medic sinking deep into his bones. Yet, as he took his first step onto the gravel paths, his jaw set with quiet defiance. Let them keep their clean rooms and their smug Athenian air. They can measure their worth by the marble of their villas. I will measure mine by the universe. Aristotle found himself standing near the edge of a shaded lecture ring, clutching a rolled parchment so tightly his knuckles ached beneath the rough wool of his tunic. He was an outsider before he even opened his mouth, marked by the dust of the road and the unpolished weight of his bearing. "Look at them," he thought, his eyes darting across the grove. "They stand in the sunlight they take for granted, born into a city that mistakes its own geography for a monopoly on human reason. Look at the newcomer." A low, smooth voice cut through the murmur of philosophical debate. Aristotle turned to see a cluster of young Athenian aristocrats lounging near a stone fountain. Their chitons were spotlessly bleached, smelling faintly of expensive oil and perfumes, their hair meticulously styled and pinned with gleaming gold cicadas, the proud, native symbol of true-born sons of the city who claimed they sprang directly from the Attic soil. At their center stood a senior student, a youth with sharp aristocratic features, who swept his gaze over Aristotle's coarse provincial tunic and dusty, travel-worn gear with undisguised, mocking amusement. Another barbarian strayed down from the Thracian marches. Another Athenian muttered loud enough for the entire grove to hear, eliciting a sharp practice ripple of snickering among the local boys. Do they grow them tall in statura, or do they just teach you how to gut fish before you learn to speak proper Attic Greek? Barbarian. The word scraped against Aristotle's pride like a rusted iron blade. Back home, his father, Nicomachus, had served as court physician to the kings of Macedon, a man of science and profound intellect. To these pampered sons of merchants and rhetoricians, however, anyone whose bloodline crossed the northern frontier was a brute fit only for hauling timber or swinging a spear. Aristotle felt a hot flash of anger prickle beneath his skin, a sudden surge of heat climbing up his neck. But years of watching his father dissect complex tissues under steady, unblinking candlelight reasserted themselves. He forced his facial muscles to relax, though his jaw remained locked in an iron line. "Control the pulse," he told himself, subduing the fire in his chest. "Do not let them see the sting." He opened his mouth to reply, but in his haste, his tongue betrayed him. His northern accent, thick, heavy on the open vowels, and clipped at the edges, slipped out before he could catch it and mold it into the crisp, melodic cadence of the South. "I came to study dialectic, not fashion," Aristotle retorted, his voice steady and low, though the distinct burr of his Thracian Macedonian borderland roots rang out instantly. The laughter sharpened, biting into the quiet afternoon air. To the elite citizens of Athens, anyone born beyond the safety of their democratic walls was half-civilized, at best unrefined, politically suspect, and forever tethered to the crude, unpredictable courts of the North. Laugh now, Aristotle thought, his gaze narrowing as he stared past the mocking faces toward the marble pillars of the lecture hall, where Plato's teachings echoed. You judge the tongue, but you have no concept of what the mind behind it will dismantle. It wasn't just the students. Even within the intellectual hierarchy of the academy, the prejudice was woven into the very fabric of daily life, infecting the air like a slow poison. Later that morning, during a rigorous public debate circle led by one of Plato's senior associates, Xenocrates, Aristotle experienced the ruthless, polished cruelty of the Athenian intellectual arena. Standing before the assembly of scholars from across the Mediterranean, Ionians, islanders, and proud locals alike, Aristotle attempted to dismantle a prevailing philosophical premise, grounding his argument not in pure abstract geometric theory, but in direct, tactile, empirical observation. We chase shadows and geometric forms in the clouds, he had reasoned internally, while ignoring the beating heart of the physical world right in front of us. Your terms are clumsy, boy from the marshes, Xenocrates interrupted sharply, his voice slicing through the air like a razor. His tone was dry, deeply dismissive, not bothering to conceal his profound disdain for the northern youth. You speak of nature as if it were a beast to be dissected in a butcher's stall, rather than an ideal form to be contemplated by a rational soul. If you wish to engage in true dialectic here, you must first learn how a civilized mind constructs an argument. Sit down before you embarrass your distant province further. A crushing, suffocating silence fell over the grove, instantly followed by the quiet, stinging murmur of smug approval from the Athenian benches. Aristotle stood frozen in the center of the ring, the parchment gripping his hands so tightly, his knuckles turned chalk white. He looked around at the cold, superior faces of the boys who had inherited the crown jewel of Greece, simply by right of birth, never having to earn a single grain of their prestige. In one stroke, they have shattered every illusion I held about this place, Aristotle thought, his inner peace violently fractured, the calm sanctuary of learning instantly dissolving into smoke. I came seeking universal wisdom, only to find a petty fortress of native vanity. Yet, as the illusion broke, something far more powerful took its place. The clean, civilized facade of the academy peeled away in his mind, exposing it for what it truly was: a battleground. This is no temple of pure thought, he realized, a fierce, cold resolve hardening deep within his chest, replacing the stinging humiliation with a sudden, unyielding fire. It is a theater of ego. Very well. If this is a war of minds, I will not cower before their geometry. His analytical gaze shifted from the hostile students to Xenocrates himself, his eyes narrowing as he began to dissect the elder scholar's rhetoric piece by piece. His premise relies on unproven idealism. His logic has gaps wide enough to drive a Macedonian chariot through. He mocks my observation of the physical, yet he cannot even construct a coherent defense against the realities of the natural world. He didn't slouch away in shame. Instead, he met Xenocrates' gaze head-on, his eyes sharp, cold, and relentlessly analytical, storing every syllable, every structural flaw in their sacred logic, and every ounce of their arrogant prejudice. Let them sneer, the young Stagirite quietly vowed as he slowly took his seat, his heartbeat steadying into a war drum. They think they are teaching me, but they are merely handing me the tools to dismantle everything they hold dear. This civilized garden is my battlefield now, and I will dissect, examine, and conquer every pillar of it until they are forced to look at the world the way it truly is. Outside these stone walls, the greater Hellenic world sat locked in a bitter, frozen peace, a cold geopolitical war simmering silently between Macedonia and the northern ridges, down through Thessaly and Epirus, across to Athens and Thebes, and southward to the edge of Arcadia and Sparta. Yet here, within the micro-negative cosmos of the academy, all of Hellas was compressed into a miniature arena of clashing intellects. It was a microcosm that mirrored the entire fractured Mediterranean, where every dialectic spar was an intellectual property that would one day ripple outward, reflecting back across the known world and far beyond it. The logic, philosophy, and rigorous idealism forged in this very crucible would eventually be carried in the mind of a young Prince Alexander, marching outward to conquer the edges of the earth until they reached the very limits of the known world. Aristotle had just entered his battlefield, stepping into the ring of the academy to begin his own calculated war dance of the intellect, while elsewhere, another war dance was waking from the earth, and Telesias was only just taking his first fateful step. To be continued in episode 55, Eastward Bound. A Great Argead Saga Alexein. Volume 1, Telesias, the War Dance. A new episode every single day. We are dropping a new episode every day until the epic conclusion of Volume 1. Each chapter delivers a tight, hyper-focused 15 to 30-minute hit of cinematic historical drama, perfect for your daily plunge into antiquity. Watch and listen now. Watch the cinematic video trailer. Listen to the full saga now. Bookmark Volume 1, Telesias playlist and Divine Oracle playlist. Join the vanguard. Subscribe to follow the bloody rise of the Argead dynasty. Thumbs up to help push our vanguard through the algorithm's gauntlet. Comment below.